Here's the question. Did I almost get robbed when I worked as a bank teller many years ago? Well, let me tell you what happened, and then I'd love for you to let me know what you think. Later in the video, I want to share a bigger illustration of how this experience also can be applied to the things that we go through in life, especially the storms of uncertainty or confusion. So let me take you back in time to an old bank building that was sometimes a little eerie and very big. I worked as a bank teller, and on an ordinary weekday afternoon, when it was somewhat quiet in the lobby, I was standing there with no customers in front of my window when I noticed a movement out of the corner of my eye. It was very slight, so I looked over, and imagine my surprise when I noticed a law enforcement officer standing next to one of the big pillars in the lobby. This particular bank had these large pillars that looked to be of marble. I don't think they really were. But he was standing there kind of beside the pillar and a tall plant that was set up in the lobby. Not only that, but he had his weapon drawn, gripping it in both hands, and pointed toward the floor. When I noticed, I couldn't help but stare, and he looked back, mouthing something that I didn't quite understand. I glanced again. I wasn't sure what he said, and maybe I should have picked up on it. But he said it again, and I still didn't catch it. The third time, the police officer gritted through his teeth. "Are you being robbed?" Oh, no. Clearly, no one was in front of my window. I glanced over at the teller beside me, and she did have a customer. By this point, she noticed that there was a little bit of commotion, and she wasn't sure what was going on either. Finally, I looked back at the officer, and I said, "I'm not, but I'm not sure if she is." At that point, my manager noticed that there was a lot of commotion. She walked over, and they had the customer at my coworker's window sit down in the lobby, and thankfully, the branch at that point was mostly empty. What happened next is the bank door got locked, and there were a lot of questions and conversation. What we learned is that multiple alarms triggered a dispatch of law enforcement to our location. But here's the strange part. One of the alarms couldn't have happened, as far as we know, because it was supposed to have been a silent alarm that was pressed by someone who was not even at their station. Furthermore, they were not even at work that day. The second thing that happened is that allegedly someone called 911 from the parking lot after they left the lobby, and allegedly they heard a conversation where someone mentioned to another party on the phone, "We're about to take the bank." Now, was that possibly an error? Did they misunderstand what they heard? I don't know, but both of those things that happened simultaneously triggered the police to come to our location thinking we were in the middle of a crisis. But wait, there's even more. After questioning all the employees, questioning my manager, and questioning the party that was at my coworker's window, there was nothing, no evidence of a potential robbery that was about to take place or that was underway. So before the officers left, they asked my manager, "Are all of your employees accounted for?" Well, it was a slow day. There weren't many of us that were there. So she answered, "Well, yes, but actually one of them is at lunch." "Where's the lunchroom?" Oh, it's down the hall and it's behind a locked door. Okay, concern started to creep up at that point. Maybe something had happened and in the confusion, it got forgotten. Well, take us. We need to go make sure that she's okay. So at this point, everything had pretty much calmed down, and we were just assuming they would walk down the hall, check on our other coworker who was enjoying her lunch break, calmly oblivious to everything going on, and then the whole matter would be solved. Except when they walked down the hall and my manager knocked on the door, expecting to hear a high-pitched female voice say, "Who is it?" But instead, a low, deep voice responded, "Who is it? Who is it?" Something like that, who knows? But whatever it was, the color drained from my manager's face, and the police officers knew that's not what she expected to hear. So at that point, they started banging on the door. "Open up, police!" Well, guess who was on the other side? Our security guard was also at lunch. And in all of the confusion and all of the activity, my manager completely forgot. Actually, so did the rest of us. But later, the security officer and the coworker who was at lunch, they shared their side of the story. And as they were in the lunchroom enjoying their lunch, all of a sudden, they heard a loud knock on the door, followed by, "Open up, police!" Well, they didn't know anything that had just happened inside the lobby. So when they opened the door and had weapons pointing at them, imagine their alarm and their fright. Each side of the door thought they were being attacked by the other. My manager and the law enforcement officers thought perhaps that someone was in the lunchroom that shouldn't have been, and that they were attacking my coworker. My coworker and the security officer thought that they were under ambush, and they didn't know if it was truly law enforcement who was on the other side of those weapons. Well, I guess to make a long story short, if it's not too late for that, it all got cleared up. And after a lot of back and forth and finally calming everything down, we opened the bank back up and everyone went on their way. But to this day, I still don't know if we were about to be robbed that day. I've thought about it. It could just be a bizarre set of circumstances where someone misunderstood a phone conversation and an alarm malfunctioned. Or it could have been someone truly was about to take the bank as they thought they heard. And because of the dispatch and the officer showing up on the scene so quickly, they were not able to, and their plan was thwarted. But sometimes over the years, I've thought about that, and I've considered how God works in our lives when it looks like everything is confusing. Sometimes it can seem that there's no way that there's a rhyme or reason to what's happening, and that there's no way that what is going on around us is of God. This morning, all of those things were kind of swirling around in my head, and I was thinking about the ways that God uses confusion and uncertainty to form and to shape our path, to give direction, and also to give protection. I wrote in my journal this morning, I once heard it said that God is not in confusion. Now, to be clear, when I heard that, I think what the individual meant is that God is not in us working confusion. But the way that it was stated was that God is not in confusion. But to me, it seems he often uses it to work out his plan. He told Moses to tell Pharaoh to let his people go. But he also hardened Pharaoh's heart so he wouldn't let them go. He moved the cloud from before the Israelites to behind them when they finally fled Egypt and faced the Red Sea, making it a cloud and darkness to the Egyptians, but a light by night to the Israelites, ultimately allowing them to cross the sea on dry ground. So I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know how God is working whenever you and I can only see confusion. I heard a minister recently that visited our church say that the same God who told Moses to go and tell Pharaoh to let his people go was the same God who also hardened Pharaoh's heart. And then earlier, when I was writing my journal, I went on Pinterest and I saw a post by a user called All to the Glory of God. It said, "Lord, please help me to be so anchored in you that the crisis around me does not create a crisis within me." So I just want to encourage you today and ask you, first of all, what do you think about the robbery or the almost robbery, or was it just a bizarre set of circumstances? Was it God's protection or just an incredible story that I happened to live through? And second, I want to encourage you that if there is confusion and uncertainty around you, if winds of change are blowing, if everything is in turmoil, or if things just don't make sense, remember, we can be so anchored in God that the crisis around us does not create a crisis within us. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day.